Hello, my name is Balkis, and today me and my group, Nur Mastura and Arisha Shafika, will be presenting our poster with the topic of Cultural Differences in Approach to Criticism, Malaysia versus America. First and foremost, what is criticism? Criticism is a way of individual expression, evaluation, and analyzing and analysis. Every culture approach to criticism are differ due to its contributing factors of the culture belief, the culture norm, the culture religion. The culture norm is also a guiding ways of choices for individual in approach to criticism, either receiving or responding to criticism. First, let's start with Malaysia culture. Malaysia culture prioritize or emphasize on the importance of interacting with one another. It's also emphasized on the importance of politeness, which is we often hear the word sopan santun or budi bahasa, and basically wealth and success comes after. So this is a culture where we focus on the group thinking. We basically emphasize on the importance of having each other's back. Since Malaysian culture emphasize on politeness, budi bahasa, and sopan santun, this is actually have such a huge influence on their ways of guiding ways to approach to criticism are either receiving or responding, which is why often a lot of Malaysian approach to criticism are very subtle, indirect, or passive aggressive. Now, in contrast, America culture is a culture where they look after themselves. They prioritize themselves. They basically prioritize that themselves comes first before other people. They also celebrate autonomy and independence. In American culture also, they separate themselves from group thinking. They very much celebrate the independence and the individual mindset, which is why this influence on a lot of American culture. They approach to criticism are very much direct, very much assertive. They don't beat around the bush. They're not indirect, and they just say it how it is. As we can see, there is a contrast difference between Malaysian culture and American culture, where Malaysians are very subtle, they're indirect, they're a lot more passive, and they're also group thinking since it is a collectivist culture, where American culture, they are a lot more direct, and they just say how it is since they celebrate the independence. And also important to note that in American culture, they also celebrate individual success and wealth as well, which later I will emphasize more on the difference how this different culture norm of Malaysia and America have such a huge impact on the way and approach to criticism.
My name is Nur Mastura and I'll be talking about the cultural orientations. Okay, so the act of giving and receiving criticism is very much related with socializing in a community, and different cultures adapt to different ways of communicating their criticisms. And when we talk about socializing in cultures, we need to talk about cultural orientations, which refers to how people behave in their community. So in cultural orientation, there's individualism and collectivism. Firstly, let's see the first one, which is individualism. This type of cultural orientation is more apparent in the Western culture, one of which is America. And basically, people of individualistic countries or cultures, they view the self as the most important. So they focus on individual values. Personal goals and rights, as well as being independent and competitive. They also embrace individuality. In fact, they even celebrate and encourage individuality. For example, they practice what is called the freedom of speech, which means that the people have the right to express their opinions, their ideas, and practice their opinions freely. In regards to the Karens and the Makcik Bawang, individualistic countries are the cultural homelands for Karens, which means it is where Karens came from. On the other hand, on this cultural orientation, there's collectivism. Collectivism is a cultural orientation that is more apparent in the Asian cultures, Malaysia included. Basically, people of collectivistic culture prioritizes the needs and interests of the collective group instead of that of individual only. And what the group thinks matters more than what the self thinks. So collectivistic cultures, they emphasize on common values, collective goals and rights, being dependent on one another, and unity overall. They value social connectedness. For example, there's a lot of events, cultural events within the Asian community, Malaysian community especially, and as a member of a group, you are always expected to be involved in those events and just mingle around with everybody. So they really value that social connectedness. And in regards to Karen's Makcik Bawangs, of course, Malaysia is where Makcik Bawang came from. Because in collective culture, they value the collective opinions and also collective value, and they also want unity. They don't want their harmony to be shaken up. That's why they resort to doing gossiping, basically. Whereas for Karen, since they value individuality, they can criticize someone in their face, basically. And Makcik Bawang, since they in a collectivistic culture where they want to reserve harmony and unity, they don't want to rock the boat, they resort to giving criticism behind people's back.
Now we're going to the findings and analysis. So in this subtopic, I will very much emphasize on the two most controversial group of people in Malaysian culture, which is the Makcik or Pakcik Bawang. In American culture, as everybody knows, the Karens. Now let's start with a Karen. What is a Karen? Karen can be defined as a middle-aged white woman with a bob haircut that always demanded to speak to a manager. This is where basically it came from, and then it started become almost kind of like a cult group of people where they are very aggressive and harsh with their way of approach to criticism, and they're very direct, especially when others people's opinions and belief are different from them. The approach are very direct. This is also can be the influence of the American culture, which I will emphasize more later. In contrast, for Malaysian culture, we have the Makcik Bawang or Pakcik Bawang. Now, Makcik Bawang or Pakcik Bawang they can define as a middle-aged Malay woman or Malay man that are always in others people's business. As we can see, it has a similarity with Karen. However, their approach and criticism are quite different. A lot of these Makcik Bawang they tend to gossip behind others people's back. This Makcik Bawang also culture originated from when a group of middle-aged Malay women they are in kitchen while slicing bawang, they tend to gossip with their group of middle-aged Malay women. On top of that, a lot of these Makcik or Pakcik Bawang they tend to give indirect and passive-aggressive comment. They're not very direct with it, but they're very much subtle with it, which can influence with the Malaysian culture approach to criticism. Now we'll come back with the American culture, which is the Karen. As I mentioned earlier, Karens are quite direct and aggressive with the way of approach to criticism due to American culture of individual mindset. When a culture have an individual mindset, they tend to be very much assertive with their opinions. However, there is line when it comes to Karen. They tend to get out of line or boundaries with their way of approach to criticism. The Karens, they are very direct. They don't really beat around the bush. For example, the anti-mask Karen or the racist Karen. For the anti-mask Karen, they basically don't wear mask in pandemic, surrounded with a lot of people in the public. And when people ask why they don't wear a mask, they believe it's their personal choice, it's a freedom of choice why they don't want to wear a mask, without thinking that them not wearing a mask can have such a huge influence on others people's health. So why they don't care is because of the individual mindset. Now we come back to the Malaysian culture, which is the Makcik Bawang. In contrast, Makcik Bawang, a lot of the gossiping occurs within a group of people. Again, Malaysian culture emphasize on the importance of a group thinking, and they also emphasize on the importance of the interaction between one another. As mentioned earlier, their way and approach to criticism are very indirect and beat around the bush. They usually tend to make a very passive-aggressive, snarky comment. For example, a young woman named Azrina, she has expressed her frustration on how a lot of these Makcik and Pakcik Bawang always criticize on her body weight and always body shame her. The way Makcik or Pakcik Bawang approach to criticism, one of the example is when they see somebody's or a young person that has gained weight, they they feel the need to comment something about it, and they go in a very indirect way. Instead of saying you're fat, they're saying, oh, you're getting healthy, as it mean, oh, makin sehat, equal to, hey, you're gained weight, you have gained more weight than the last time I saw you. As we can see, there's a huge contrast between the Malaysian culture and American culture in approach to criticism, whereas for Malaysian culture, they're a lot more indirect, they're passive in their approach to criticism due to Malaysian culture norm and belief of politeness, whereas in contrast for American culture, they are a lot more direct, they are a lot more assertive with their approach to criticism due to its culture norm belief of the celebration of independence and individual thinking. That is all from me. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Arisha. So there are many articles that express the inability for Malaysians to express criticism openly, namely through suppression of criticism that is enforced by not only Malaysian culture but the Malaysian government itself. Whenever you post anything negative criticizing the government or anything, there will be people coming into the comment sections of whatever you've posted and saying, hey, maybe you should take this down, either because they're afraid the original poster was going to get arrested, or because they don't agree with the criticism that person has said. Therefore, they are trying to shut down and mute the conversation. So, like I said, there are many articles that express this. Like, for example, last year, Al Jazeera, they actually did a segment on how the Malaysian government has been treating its essential workers. And in response to this, the Malaysian police actually raided the Al Jazeera Malaysian headquarters because they didn't like what Al Jazeera had to say about Malaysian government's management within that segment. On a more lighthearted note, an example of Malaysian suppression is when discourse was held over Mira Filza, a very popular influencer and an entrepreneur. She was wearing a sari in order to promote her brand, and some people were outraged, while some people were outraged at the people who got outraged. The thing is, Mira Filza is a very rich and popular person, and she is in the eye of the public, and the public side who criticized her were bringing up points about how she should not profit off a culture that isn't hers, while the other side, the Karens, essentially told them to shut up, told them that they were being too sensitive and that they shouldn't say anything about this because they should just say that it's fine. While in America, which freedom of speech is way too broad and way too open, they can freely have many hate groups such as the KKK, which actively oppress and even harm minority groups. As Malaysians, we should be allowed to have an open discussion about any qualms we have with anything that affects our life, because we're all just humans and we have the right to live. We have the right to be respected. So this should be even more prominent and even more of an open platform for people who are in minority groups, people who are discriminated against. They should have a platform in which they are able to criticize parts of Malaysia, Malaysian culture, Malaysian government when they need to. So with Americans, although they are aggressive at times, they are actually allowed to have an open space in which they can talk about whatever opinion that they have without having this culture of silencing people, of suppressing discussion, unlike Malaysians do. Although America, on the other hand, is way too broad and way too open, therefore no consequences aren't even taken towards these people most of the time. So, all in all, I think that freedom of speech and freedom of criticism is important. Although freedom of speech does not and should not mean freedom of consequence. So that's it from all of us. Thank you so much.